No.
And the second thought that I had was about the discussion. I mean, I was at the knowledge sharing track, and so of course we talked about content. But then when we talk about content, I think, I mean, maybe, you know, not everybody will agree with me, but the lines that we used to have, you know, a few years ago between the technology and the content is actually getting blurred, because the way we have to deliver content is actually content in itself. We talked about, for example, call for action, task-oriented, but these are all kind of technical aspect of the content rather than the content itself, except that it becomes the content. And so I think that we have to move beyond, you know, clear lines. Okay, there's the techies, and there is the former media people, and the writers, and all this, because it all becomes one. I mean, we you know,
we called it
transmedia.
Exactly. There was a movement towards transmedia in the
exactly, and I think if we keep that in mind, then we know where we're going, because otherwise we're still going to have, you know, are you a techie person, are you a content person, and not realizing that now we're talking about the same thing, right? I mean, when we read the New York Times online, you know, the story comes to us no matter how, and we still get it. So it's not a question of, oh, this is, you know, traditional media, blah, blah, etc. And then the last thing, still about content, since you really stressed this, is that we have a real challenge, I think, because of the fact that I think we all here technologically quite oriented. It was interesting for me to look at the room where we were in the in the UN conference room, and I was like, this is probably the first time that the conference room 3 had so many laptops on the tables. You know, generally the ambassadors and ministers that are there do not bring their laptops. And so it's, you know, we have our own way, I would say, as a community. And you said, you know, this is the first and last time that we're going to be here in the constellation. But we are that constellation. And so we have to also think about how do we communicate us to and you were talking about senior management. No, you were. How do we communicate who we are and how we function to the others, our partners, the one that we have to work with, the one that decide on our funding, the one that decide on our human resources, on things that we, unfortunately, have learned to take for granted, and that they don't. So, you know, and that's content, actually. So we have to also think about that, not just the substance of what we're working here, but how do we communicate, us, to the ones that we're going to have to work with. Thank you.
There was a couple more? You were too?
Very briefly.
Okay.
So the question was, what do I want to get out of this conference? I'm actually working on merging content with technology and creating a new database that will approach the macro level, because yes, there are lots of little programs out there, but we don't have a system yet in which we can globally look at all the different programs. I'm working in girls' education, so I'm mapping girls' education programs and private public. I mentioned it earlier in the morning. But what we want to do is map all types of programs and all agents working on girls' education programs. And we're in the process of creating a database to do that, but we're thinking about who our end users are. They're researchers, they're policymakers, they're lay people, they're policy implementers. We have a lot of end users that we need. I could definitely use some assistance from the technical people on how best to present this message, because it's going to be different for each user. And oftentimes, we don't have that marriage yet.
How many of you are aggregating content across different organizations or sectors? Raise your hands. Hi. I should too. So there's a fair number of us. So that may actually be something useful to put up on the wiki as well. What are you doing? These kinds of efforts that are sort of cross-disciplinary, or at least cross-organizational. You?
Just very briefly, yeah.
You have the last word, my friend. Make it good.
I'll be quick. But I just...
Scott.
Our communications director, Sarah, who spoke earlier, I think you made the comment that ICT is not a sector. But it's interesting, right? There wasn't a public announcement. There wasn't any moment of global recognition, but quietly over the last 10, 15 years, all the organizations providing these programs in the field and the communities that they're now trying to assist have become information workers. The supply chains that drive the businesses that we're trying to make sustainable in these countries are being powered by SMS. The communities that are being built to bring together isolated groups, whether geographically isolated or, as we heard earlier today, HIV patients, are happening online. So why isn't ICT treated as a sector? It's as if, and it's not because ultimately it's the donors who aren't driving that. And it seems like there's a lack of recognition that the ability to create and shape in an ongoing way the technologies to drive these programs is becoming increasingly important. We recently formed a group called the Open Mobile Consortium, mentioned earlier at Mobile Active. And we all had this moment of revelation where we realized we were all trying to do development programs in the field, but at the same time, we were trying to use technology. We had to use technology. It's the way the world works now. And yet, we couldn't find commercial tools, and we couldn't find open source tools that would do what we needed to do, so we built them from scratch ourselves. And then we deploy them in the field. And then we evaluate the efficacy of the programs, and then we evaluate the performance of the tools, and we make the tools better as a result. There are a lot of organizations out there doing that, and I believe every relief and development organization in 10 years is going to be working that way. How do we make this a sector?
Couldn't have ended better. Now, there's your challenge for tomorrow.